Hey everybody, HomeSliceHenry here, and in today's video, I'm going to be showcasing another buffed Pokemon in the Might and Mastery update of Go Battle League, and that is Sludge on Shadow Galarian Weezing. Sludge got a massive rework. It's now 70 damage, 40 energy, and that gives Galarian Weezing a very efficient and very powerful charge attack. I'm pairing the Weezing up with a rollout Blastoise and a Galarian Moltres, and I had incredibly positive sets. I believe I went 10-1 across the battles that I used to team. So without further ado, let's hop into the matches, and we're off to a pretty okay start in match number 1, leading Shadow Galarian Weezing into Malamar. Psywave, of course, will hit for super effective damage, but their charge attacks are going to be walled. Sludge would inflict some solid damage, so I'm able to grab an early shield, and now I can send in the Blastoise. Blastoise is absolutely atrocious IV, but it's shiny and it has sunglasses, so I'm definitely going to be using it. They are going to fire off back-to-back superpowers, and now they're going to send in Dusclops. Dusclops going to be immediately met with multiple Hydro Cannons. The issue for me is that Dusclops is very bulky, so they can actually survive multiple Hydro Cannons, which not a lot of things can tank neutrally. Dusclops is going to have to throw, however, as Blastoise was not going to get farmed down there, so Shadow Punch is going to pick up the KO. I can send in Galarian Moltres and try and go for an energy advantage. Shadow Galarian Weezing and Galarian Moltres do have very good synergy now, as the main thing you really have to watch for with Galarian Weezing is going to be Mud Slappers and Psywave users, and something like a Moltres is going to do very well into both. And now Moltres is in prime position to sweep. Brave Bird KOs the Grumpig, and this poor Malamar, I mean, they just can never Psywave down. I get to fire off Ancient Power, that's going to be shielded, and now send in the Shadow Galarian Weezing. And I know that Shadow Galarian Weezing is not going to get KO'd here, so I can tank the foul play, make it to the Brutal Swing. Looks like I actually got to a Sludge there as well, but Brutal Swing will definitely be enough to pick up the knockout, and we take a Game 1 win. We actually see the exact same lead in the next match, Shadow Galarian Weezing into Malamar. I saw a lot of Malamar leads with water types in the back. Seems like people are really trying to hunt Lapras lead. Here my opponent actually plays to the CMP tie. They're going to throw the resisted foul play, and now I get to fire off the Sludge. Look at that neutral damage, by the way. Malamar is pretty decent bulk, and Sludge absolutely shredded that thing. We end up having a simultaneous swap, my Blastoise into their Feraligatr. A lot of Feraligatrs were shielding the Skull Bash, so I decided to go for the Hydro Cannon bait, and they called a bait, so that was a bit of a misplay on my part, but I had people shielding the Skull Bash, so I figured it was time for the bait, and unfortunately the bait did not work out there. They're going to fire off another Hydro Cannon, that's going to get Blastoise quite low, and I'm going to send in Moltres to get an energy advantage. Now, Moltres up a few turns is incredibly scary, especially when they're forced to bring in Lapras. And this is part of what makes Dark Flyers very interesting this season, is the best ice type, which is Lapras, really struggles against Galarian Moltres, Mandibuzz, Bombardier, these kinds of Dark Flyers, just due to the fact that it has no fast move pressure. Here I got to fire off an Ancient Power. This is a CMP tied to a Sparkling Aria, and I can very comfortably no shield. So I'm going to let the Sparkling Aria go, and now I just have to watch for a catch. Opponent is going to switch into Malamar. I get to Sucker Punch all the way down, opponent sees the writing on the wall, and concedes the match. Shadow Galarian Weezing into Abomasnow, a great lead for the Weezing. Weezing able to outpace the Abomasnow if they're on Icy Wind, and have similar pacing if they're on Weather Ball. Sludge would probably one-hit KO, so that's going to force my opponent to commit a shield. They are on Icy Wind, so now I'm debuffed. They safe switch into a Molga, and this is actually going to be a very uncomfortable Pokemon to deal with. I'm going to stay in, fire off the Sludge. That does so much debuffed damage, and now I think I have to try and call a bait. I no shield, it's the Discharge, and now I can send in Blastoise. Blastoise is going to look to go for a rollout farm down. Discharge is going to connect. Blastoise gets the farm down. That is incredibly important. I have a lot of energy on the Blastoise, and Blastoise's energy will usually go pretty far. In the back is more Pekko, and I think I can hold on to make it to a second Hydro Cannon. Come on, Blastoise. We get there, but there's a switch and a catch onto Abomasnow. This is still going to be tricky. Switch clock's up, but not fast enough for me to get a 0-turn switch. Instead, I get a 1-turn switch, and that's unfortunate, because I believe that means that I can't farm down. And I can't farm down. I'm forced to throw the Ancient Power, and this means I don't have a charge attack on my Moltres for Morpeko. Morpeko fires off its energy. They're going to go for the electric ore wheel, picking up the knockout, but I still have Galarian Weezing, and thanks to this new cracked pacing on Sludge, I'm able to get to the Sludge. This is a neutral Sludge, almost one-hit KOs. In comes the Blastoise. We take the win with 1 HP remaining, and that was actually a battler on my friends list. Shadow Galarian Weezing into Shadow Drapion. I'm going to throw 1 Fairy Wind and Safe Switch into the Blastoise. Drapion, a bit of a core breaker for this core, but even so, honestly, whether you end up with it on the Moltres or on the Weezing, as long as you can get a slight energy advantage out of the mid game, you're going to be in a pretty nice spot. Here my opponent sends in Shadow Annihilate. Shadow Annihilate trying to get the counter down, but look at Blastoise. So much work, and now I can send in the Weezing. Weezing, no problem tanking a Rage Fist, and thanks to the Fairy Wind buff last season, I get a full farm down. Now I exit with a lot of energy. Even resisted, Sludge is going to do a ton of damage because this is Shadow versus Shadow. So I get to fire off the Sludge. That's going to force a shield from my opponent, and now I'm going to bank a Sludge in case I need it for later and send in the Galarian Moltres. Moltres is going to be hit with an Aqua Tail. Opponent running a team from last season, and trainer, you cannot do that anymore. This is a new meta, and in this new meta, the old stuff doesn't work like it once did. Brave Bird is going to set up the Sucker Punch farm down of that Dunsparce. I make a last second Ancient Power into the Drapion, and I have a Sludge loaded on Galarian Weezing. So we're going to take the win and the 2 shield flex versus this opponent. Let's move into the next match. Galarian Weezing sees the Dream lead as we lead into Superior. Superior going to safe switch into Blastoise, and I do not have a great response to a Blastoise safe switch on this team. My best answer is my own. I'm going to throw the Sludge that does so much damage, try for a Hydro Cannon catch, but I am unsuccessful. Good patience by my opponent. They are going to go for the Skull Bash. That does huge damage, and I am going to be firing off my Hydro Cannon. Unfortunately, their defense is +1, which means they can actually survive the Hydro Cannon and make it to a Hydro Cannon of their own. So my Blastoise is barely going to win Switch, but not by much. They actually switch lock Superior, and look at the pacing on Weezing. Weezing already at the Sludge. Sludge would inflict massive damage, and it lands. That's a Superior nearly getting 1-hit KO'd. Superior goes for the Frenzy Plant. That's going to do significant damage. I'm going to bank energy and send in the Moltres, because Moltres I know can tank any one move. And at this point, I'm wondering if this is actually the team that I featured with Spiritomb in the back. And if it is Spiritomb in the back, having up energy on the Moltres is very, very helpful because Spiritomb is an incredibly terrifying Pokemon to go up against. Spiritomb, Sucker Punch, hits very hard even though it's resisted. Like, look at this. My Moltres is getting absolutely torn to shreds. Opponent makes a catch on a Blastoise, and now I am genuinely quite worried. I might lose this game. Spiritomb is going to be able to apply a ton of Rock Tomb debuffs onto the Moltres, slowing my damage, so I'm forced out. I switch in the Weezing. Can Weezing hold on here and make one final brutal swing? We just do. And my goodness, my opponent made this way closer than it ever should have been. Oh my goodness, we narrowly escape with a win. We see an absolute nightmare lead, leading Galarian Weezing into a Psywave Venomoth. I save switch into Blastoise. Out comes Credilli. And this is not looking great. If I can call a Rock Tomb bait, then I'm right back in the game. But that's going to be quite difficult to do, as they can very easily go for the Grass Knot. I decide to risk it. It's the Grass Knot, and I get KO'd, and that's unfortunate. Now I really have to rely on them being ABA weak to the Moltres. I send in the Shadow Galarian Weezing. Unfortunately, my fast move does get denied. They're going to go for the Rock Tomb, and that does so much damage. My goodness. I'm going to overfarm as much as I possibly can. I am missing one Fairy Wind of energy due to that deny, but I'm going to save this energy, send in Moltres, and in the back is Morpeko, and unfortunately, this is looking like a loss. Morpeko probably just going to go straight Psychic Fangs in this matchup, and I'm in a very difficult position. I'm going to go for the Ancient Power. At this point, I mean, I have no other choice but to no-shield the Psychic Fangs. I will get to fire off the Ancient Power, and I'm thinking maybe, against all odds, there is a chance here, because I will be able to outpace. I can make the Ancient Power, and I have a Sludge loaded on the Shadow Galarian Weezing. So I can switch, combo with the Galarian Weezing. Sludge is going to be able to KO Morpeko. Back in comes the Venomoth. Venomoth gets the farm down. In comes the Moltres, and I think Moltres is just too far behind on energy. So in this game, we were triple hard countered. We were still able to make it as close as we possibly could. I think even if I didn't get denied, I still lose that game because the Psywave damage just did too much to the Weezing. But if that's the only game that I lose with this team, I am very okay with that. Shadow Galarian Weezing versus Talonflame. Sludge does not one-shot here, of course, but Sludge will do a lot of damage and potentially put it in farm down range for either of my back Mons. Sludge is going to be shielded. Opponent actually ends up under-tapping here. The fact that they're under-tapping makes me think it's Flame Charge, and it is. I'm going to bank a move, send in Blastoise, and Blastoise, boosted fly will hurt, but I can survive it. I don't have good IVs in the Blastoise, but it's bulky enough. Out comes Azumarill, and Azumarill, not a Pokemon that I've seen a whole lot of this season. But Azumarill, I should do pretty decently into. I'm able to buff up my defense with Blastoise. I think the opponent may have been able to farm down if they committed to it. It would have been very close, but they decide not to risk it. In comes the Weezing. I get the one turn again, which is frustrating. I wanted to do 3 in cap tie, but instead I'm not able to do that. Opponent shields the Azumarill, and they just do not know about this pacing on Weezing. We outpace. They lose all that energy. In the back is Clodsire, and this is now a very comfortable win for Galarian Moltres. This is actually a Mudshot Clodsire, which I was not expecting to see. They do go for the Stone Edge. They're going to send in the Talonflame. Granted, early days, you're going to see some interesting movesets and people trying out new stuff. But as long as I keep enough residual energy, I can always just get to the Ancient Power. And I'll be able to Sucker Punch it into a range where a Brave Bird will KO. So we're just going to be in a winning position. The opponent could have been in an okay spot had they thrown the energy on the Azumarill, but they just gave me a really easy out when they overfarmed and then played to the CMP tie that they did not win. Shadow Galarian Weezing versus Malamar. Again, a very familiar lead for Weezing at this point, and I'm very okay playing it out. I'm going to overfarm slightly, go for the Sludge, grab a shield, send in Blastoise, and my opponent is going to send in Shadow for Alligator. This was a lot of the cores that I kept seeing. Malamar with water in the back. This time it's the Shadow for Alligator. Hydro Cannon is going to connect, and last time I baited and they no-shielded. So I'm full sending the Skull Bash, and that's just a one-hit KO. Goodbye for Alligator. Oh my goodness. Back in comes the Malamar. Malamar forced to throw energy. Blastoise very quick to get the charge moves. Foul Play is going to pick up the knockout, but now I can send in Galarian Moltres, and Moltres gets the farm. I am going to respect the potential superpower. They are going to go for the superpower. In the back is Wigglytuff. And if you dislike Wigglytuff, you're going to like Galarian Weezing. Weezing gets the fire off the Sludge. That's going to be shielded up by the opponent. They get to fire off a Swift, but it's not going to matter. Galarian Weezing, thanks to having Sludge and this lightning fast pacing, absolutely owns this Wigglytuff. Look at the Sludge. Get one hit KO'd. In comes the Malamar. Malamar has farm, but I have a move loaded on the Moltres, and they would need 2 moves to take this game, and they just don't have the energy for it. Ancient Power will easily be enough now that they've debuffed their defense to KO the Malamar and take the win. We move to the next match. Shadow Galarian Weezing, amazing lead leading into Superior. I'm ABA strong to Superior. They're going to save switch into Feraligatr. I'm going to bank a Sludge and send in Blastoise. Even if my opponent makes a play for switch advantage, I'm very okay with that because their Superior has nowhere to go against the Galarian Weezing, Galarian Moltres core. Due to the energy lead, they're going to be able to outpace here and make it to another Hydro Cannon. That is going to be no shielded, and I decide to go for the bait. I'm thinking that they're going to try and shield and farm down, but Blastoise is bulky. Blastoise, 1 HP, makes the Skull Bash. They have to double shield or lose switch advantage. Skull Bash picks up the knockout, down a shield and down switch advantage. Opponent is going to resign the match. Hopping into the final match, Shadow Galarian Weezing, and it's one final Malamar lead for the road. And again, as long as you end up switching out of this works out very nicely for Shadow Galarian Weezing, as you get some nice damage or an early shield onto the Malamar, and then you can send in Blastoise. And Blastoise is a bit uncomfortable to answer, like a lot of teams don't have a great check to it. Superpower is going to connect, dealing some pretty substantial damage. Out comes Dusknoir. This is actually an Astonish Dusknoir. I do strongly believe that Hex is the far better move to go for on Dusknoir. The pacing on Hex is absolutely wild. I'm going to send in Galarian Moltres. They are only going to make one move here, so I'm always going to be shielding up the Shadow Dynamic Punch. And now I have Moltres in a completely winning position. They have Clodsire in the back. I am going to throw on 6 here, so playing to the CMP tie as they make it to a Sludge Bomb, because I want to incentivize them to try and combo play here, because they have a move loaded, but I can just switch into the Weezing and catch the move. So it was basically a bit of a ploy to try and bait them back out, so we end up catching the Superpower, and now we're just in a completely winning position once again, as we can go for the Brutal Swing, pick up the knockout. In comes the Clodsire. Clodsire, Brutal Swing is not quite going to be enough to KO them, but it does enough. And no one move can KO Moltres from this health range, so Moltres very comfortable tanking whatever they throw. It is, of course, going to be another Sludge Bomb, and we're able to take that win. All in all, I think Shadow Galarian Weezing is sick this season. I think it is incredibly strong and honestly could contend for a meta role. Obviously, there's so much up in the air this season with the amount of changes and the amount of strong Pokemon that they've made. But giving Shadow Galarian Weezing finally a good same type attack bonus, efficient charge attack is incredible. Because obviously Play Rough and Overheat worked in previous seasons, but Weezing was very slow with those. But now with Sludge, having that 5-4 pacing, you're outpacing so many Pokemon, and you're getting really good damage as well. I do think Shadow on the Galarian Weezing probably a bit preferred to the regular, just due to the fact that the damage output you have, the ability to farm things down is incredible with the Shadow. And I do think even if you don't have Galarian Moltres, you could probably use something like a Bombardier or other Dark Flyers and still have pretty similar results. And as for the safe swap, Blastoise, I mean, Blastoise is just my boy this season. Blastoise is just unbelievable on the safe swap. Blastoise, people are probably eventually going to figure out what to respond to Blastoise with, but for now, that rock, water, and normal coverage just puts Blastoise in an incredibly neutral spot in basically every single game. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoy watching content like this, please do leave a like on the video, as it does help it get recommended to other people. And a special thank you as always to our channel members here on YouTube. The support you guys provide is sincerely appreciated. So thank you guys oh so very much. And until next time, I've been HomeSliceHenry.